Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story featuring a Luigi Mangione type. Written by Sally Straight, narrated by Gray Trainer. Find them on Instagram at GREYTRAYNOR. To support this podcast, give it 5 stars and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Listener discretion is advised. Chapter 13. While they were both still naked, the semen and spit drying on their skin, Mario cried and confessed, his posture uncharacteristically bent and slouchy, still straddling Ted. Mario spoke about his mother, from her love of 70s romance movies, when movie stars could have and did have yellow smoker's teeth, to how she needed surgery to fully remove her cancer before it started spreading to other parts of her body.
But they denied the procedure, said it was too risky,
Mario said, after falling once again into Ted's arms, resting his head against the older man's shoulder, and the young man's hair positioned there felt almost exactly like Ted had imagined it would, a comfy, gentle sensation, wild cashmere. But the older man wasn't distracted by what Mario's body could offer him, nor was he mentally reliving that amazing second round of sex. No, Ted was completely enwrapped with the young man's lament, and it was such a horrible thing to hear. From his line of work, Ted knew exactly what Mario was talking about. He'd designed many an artificial intelligence program for insurance companies, the kind that quickly analyzed up-to-date health records from patients, including their pre-existing conditions, and whether they'd benefit or not from certain treatments and surgeries. Ted knew for a fact that the real wording of Mario's rejection letter had been described as high risk instead of too risky. But there, on the couch, was a time to comfort, not correct. Mario looked up after a moment of silence, probably to catch his breath after all that emotional undoing, and stared at Ted with worry.
You don't have United HealthShare insurance, right? You're healthy. You're not that old.
Mario broke eye contact and quieted. Seeing a way to cheer the young man up, Ted leaned in, pressing his nose into Mario's forehead, chuckling.
That old? I'm not that old? Is that what you were trying to get at?
Mario snorted in between sniffles, still looking away, embarrassed.
That's not how I meant it.
No, of course not, Ted said with a smirk, taking the opportunity to clutch a handful of Mario's hair, enjoying his first real contact with it outside of sex. He began to massage the scalp, letting the black curls spill out from his grasp. Mario, I'm really sorry about your mom. Ted meant it, concerned about the young man. Deeply so, especially considering all the things he mentioned were on his plate. School, constant work, and a very sick mother. But the older man was also relaxed and calm, even more so than he'd been over these last few weeks post-Gauntlet. This time with Mario, despite the tears and the young man's real-life horrors, as terrible as a series of punches to the open mouth, this moment on the couch felt so comfortable, like true intimacy. The pillow talk after sex, a sort of discussion about their days, imagining their tomorrows, both actively listening to one another. To Ted, this was an unexpected joy in spite of the conversation's grim content.
But I do want to ask, you're not sick with anything, are you? You're okay? You're doing okay?
The young man ran his fingers over Ted's chest hair, and the older man watched the hands float across, then tickle his body, Mario's fingernails perfectly cleaned and trimmed. Ted got the notion to kiss them, so he grabbed them and did as such, giving every pad a quick peck before lingering in Mario's palm, loving how the fingers gently held his face. No, I'm fine. I'm not sick with anything. The older man gently placed Mario's hand back on his chest, where it rested without roaming.
That's good.
Mario then curled up tighter against Ted's naked body, contorting his mouth somewhat, making his speech half muffled.
I just hope you have good insurance.
I get it for free. The words flew out of Ted before he realized what he was saying, implying, dangling over Mario and his dying mother. Mario's incredulousness caused his voice to rise.
You do?
Yeah, it's in my contract. I sorta work for them. Ted bit his lip as he said it, but he couldn't help himself. He didn't want to lie to the young man. It wouldn't have fit the unspoken principles of their bond. There had been nothing but honesty, compassion, and pure enjoyment of one another since they met. So why should Ted start to act differently? Rising from the older man's chest, the sofa letting out one record scratch of a squeak, Mario cut his eyes at Ted, for the first time shooting something negative at the older man, something guarded. This sudden wariness made Mario look so young, as if he had just found out, in his best buddy's tree-filled backyard, all secrets and shadowed wet grass, that cigarettes aren't adult fun at all. They're just smelly, painful ways to waste time. In standing up, reaching for his clothes, sifting through the pile of their commingled garments, Mario's taut body was no longer limp and deferential. It was strong and full of intent, his movements snapping. Though they were still both naked, Mario barely stepping into his pants, Ted felt exposed, ashamed for being so honest and foolish for ruining everything. He couldn't help but start to defend himself. He wanted their perfect back, that closeness forming after another spectacular entanglement. Ted didn't want this to be something Mario would go on to consider a waste of time, something that the young man would start to forget. But, please, hear me out, Ted cried. He didn't dare reach out and touch an irate Mario, who managed to slip on the entirety of his clothing with haste, as if an emergency siren had signaled overhead. Now Ted was the only naked one. After Mario's gray t-shirt fell and hid away his abs, the older man never felt more alone or stupid. A ceramic frog playing a banjo, glimpsing itself for the first time, realizing its futile, erroneous nature. Singing what? Playing for whom? Ted continued, "You gotta understand, I work for them, but I'm not them. I'm really not. I'm just a software engineer." "It doesn't matter," Mario said. Mario's eyes were on the door, and Ted knew if the young man walked out, standing tall in his resentment, he would be crushing everything that they had shared, pulverizing it in his mind. It was true that their exchanges hadn't amounted to all that much, but to Ted, they had been the things to start such crystalline feelings. Time spent with Mario had been a luxury, a grand set of experiences, and he didn't want them to end, especially if they didn't need to. This can't be the last time, Ted thought. The memories of what they had shared could last him the rest of his life, sure, but he wanted the full experience of what they could be together, continue with what was beginning to form, a solid foundation to reach up to God knows what, reaching God knows where. Perhaps where birds go to get away. Ted's slip-up had only been a blip. He could fix it. He could make it right. "Mario, don't leave. I know what I can do. I'm not the enemy. I can help." Chapter 14. It would have been wrong of Mario to tell his mother that her surgery was back on. So he didn't say that. Didn't storm into the house with a bouquet of balloons, their mylar edges scraping the ceiling, making that roaring, dragging noise. No. Instead, he just arrived home like normal, peppering in that things would turn around into their nightly catch-up, and on the couch, when they watched women with blonde feathered hair kiss mustachioed men in 10-gallon hats, he'd lean in, eyes still on the screen, and say, "Everything will work out." At bedtime, when he rubbed her hands with the most expensive hydrating lotion he found researching different hospice Reddit threads, he pictured her hands growing much older, allowed to be, thanks to the forthcoming surgery, now a probability, all because of Ted. Mario traced the ridges of his mom's veins, following them to the knuckle, and pictured a more sunken skin, dotted with liver spots, aged to a place where expiration was understandable, undeniable, instead of years early because of decisions made by people, old white men, that they didn't know. "It'll work out," Mario said, making sure to apply the cream all the way to his mother's shoulders, rubbing it in fully so she wasn't sliding across the silken bamboo sheets. Another extra cozy find thanks to message boards. And that night, when he got in their shared car, ready to caravan drunks and deliver small orders of Taco Bell, Mario exhaled behind the wheel, leaning back into the headrest. Adam's apple pushed forward and thought, "It will work out." All this repetition sprung from an agreement that felt strong enough to make things easier for Mario, hampering what had been rising in him like a flooding river, every bad feeling steadily swelling, ready to burst through any dam or sandbag or cement-walled basement. Because when Ted told Mario that he worked for the very insurance company that threatened to kill his mother, a heat ran through Mario's arm, a burning urge to strike the older man, pummel him until Ted knew what it was like to experience the full spectrum of the human experience, when one's innocent nature is torn asunder because someone else decided you didn't quite matter. And how could he feel any differently? His mother was being murdered. But once Ted's promise saw fruition, Mario believed the fury inside of him would die, disappear completely, as fast as it had ignited, despite its strong roots wrapped around his insides, a steely wet vice. And their agreement and this go-ahead for his mom's surgery were additionally great because it meant he could keep seeing Ted. Mario liked tracing the patterns of white hair in the older man's goatee, while Ted giggled, a deep fluctuation of the chest. Mario liked how their equally clammy bodies would stick to one another, only to be pulled apart, like particularly sturdy Velcro, ending in a freeing smack. Also, Mario liked that Ted was a great listener, one of the few people who let the young man talk about his mom and other deep parts of his life without changing the subject, barging in, speculating on the impending night's level of fucked-upness, or, more often than not, just doling out complete silence in the face of Mario's woes. And, most importantly, the young man liked that Ted was smart, coming up with the plan to talk to one of his coworkers about Mario's mom, a direct appeal regarding the surgery. Post-coitus, post-tears, and post-tantrum, having heard what Mario heard in that big empty office, that solid, handsome Ted would change the minds of those motherfuckers at United Healthshare meant that they could stay seeing each other, and Mario wanted that very much, and proved it with another makeout session on Ted's black leather couch. Ted's goofy, hungry kisses, now they were a reason to stick around, the exploratory tongue and those pulling lips, threatening to drag Mario down into the older man's depths, swim laps in his veins, lounge casually over the lulling beat of his heart. Now, with a promise made, Mario could push his anger away, focus more on time with his mother, and preparation for her impending surgery, rather than finding the home addresses and license plates and office locations of important people at United Healthshare. This way, he could forget how to utilize the 3D printer his buddy Blake had to build a gun. All could be forgotten, which would make it easier, creating space in the mind to store away memories of Mario and Ted's upcoming first date, the young man's idea. After the office sex, Mario and Ted had walked out of the building together, with an aura around them of a new beginning, a fresh feeling, like they were wearing new clothes, and not ones that had just been rumpled on the floor, absorbing the humid and heavy scent of sex. "What do you say we get dinner sometime?" Mario asked, zeroing in on a mole that he had yet to notice behind Ted's ear, the perfect nubbin, like a pencil eraser, ready to correct, ready to make a change. Mario could see that hesitancy in Ted once again, slowing his step as they made their way onto the plaza where the young man had been skating an hour earlier, Pigeon still perched on the bench, or a pretty rock-solid look-alike in its place. But any uncertainty on Ted's part didn't lead to a question, requiring Mario to once again verify his desire for the older man. And also, Ted didn't physically retreat more than just a simple lift of the shoulders. The guy was making progress. When his shoulders came down, Ted replied simply, "I would love that." The plan was a dinner 5 days later at a fast casual restaurant because Mario had to consider the fear of his frail mother having a medical emergency, and a place with linen napkins was too shackling. So it was meet up, then food, with maybe a nearby post-meal stroll that could lead to ice cream, but just one scoop, or, forgetting any dairy, they might simply enjoy one another's company on a spring night, going nowhere in particular, both quietly feeling giddy, asking questions they had yet to ask each other before, holding on to the answers like children covet dandelions. And date night came fast because of the continued Ted effect, where moments, large periods of time, filled with thoughts about how Ted walked and how his thick fingers looked touching Mario's body, and was he a gum chewer or a mint person? All their past experiences together mixed with the possibility of a future sped up Mario's placement in the space-time continuum. Sitting in those stiff lecture hall seats and sitting with his mom, chatting with her, doling out her medicine, Mario careful to check and double-check that it was the day for the orange pill, and that the fat white one was properly cut into a quarter dose. It all slipped away until there Mario was, standing in front of the mirror suction cup to his bedroom wall, wondering what he should wear. There had been an influx of black clothing when Mario planned on doing something wild, perhaps casing a CEO's house, or delivering a threatening message in spray paint on a gleaming white car, but now all his skulking clothes could be returned. There was no need for it anymore. Black is boring, he thought, staring into his closet that almost seemed to mock him. Never had he cared about what he wore for a date. That was for insecure people in shitty movies, bloopers running during the credits, angling for a handful of post-film pity laughs. But after trying on 6 short-sleeve button-ups, either too wrinkled or ill-fitting, meant for his scrawnier arms 3 years ago, Mario was running out of options. He winced, now feeling betrayed by his closet, or rather exposed, suddenly seeing himself as a jock bro, derogatory, because of his apparel. Did he really own this many tank tops? The point had been to show off his developed arms, the body he sculpted himself with the help of protein shakes, extended dieting, and lifting. But what if he had somewhere important to go, one with a professional dress code? He wasn't a kid anymore. He needed real shirts. The insecurity inside of him, that same shitty movie kind he'd always scoffed at, came from a place that knew Ted wasn't dealing with the same problem. Ted probably had the opposite closet, one filled with dress shirts and suits, items he could buy at will, no price tags kept on because he was more overdrawn than a drag queen's eyebrows. It was true they were only going to a burger joint, a place with hollow metal chairs that clanged against the floor, and there were sure to be ill-behaved screaming children, fry sauce stamped across their tiny hands. Mario reached into the back of his closet, pushing the hangered no-goes to the side with a sh sound. The root of his uncertainty wasn't really his lack of money, not totally. It was more that he cared. He wanted to impress Ted with what he wore, show up to a place that specialized in Greece looking hot but mature, impress a man who had probably been on a million dates with guys who had more cash, more assets than Mario, and were undeniably more refined. Sure, Mario was intelligent, certainly for his age, but one time in a common room Oscars party, back at Laser Beach Community College, there was a plate of liver pate, which Mario pronounced liver patty. Correcting him, the theater kids glared, making him feel like he was the dumb jock who just took the red eye from Asahola, Arkansas. And suddenly, that humiliating moment was all Mario could think of, obsess over. Then his hair was too boyish, his sneakers too dirty, and what grown-up, aside from the professionals and the sponsored skateboards? Knowing that whatever he chose would be the wrong childish thing, Mario picked a sleeveless black t-shirt that, with a pair of straight-leg jeans, made him look like a drummer. And yes, maybe drummers were known for usually being the stupidest in the band, but they were also the second in line to get laid, after, of course, the lead singer. And if he wasn't coming back home any smarter, or more mature, or more refined, belly full of pate, Mario definitely wanted to return freshly fucked. Saddled in between the bunches of his discarded clothes, the date night rejects, Mario's phone buzzed. It was Ted. "I'm here. Early. Sorry. Do not feel the need to rush," the text read. So that was dating Ted. He was early to things. Mario was more of a right-on-time kind of guy, usually too busy with something before to ever imagine being early. Intrigued, Mario let out a excited to glean everything he could from this man, whom he wanted to kiss, and fuck, and hold tighter than koalas cling to eucalyptus trees. He wanted it all, and couldn't wait to try. On his way out, Mario kissed his sleeping mother goodbye, her forehead sweaty from the medication. "Call me if you need anything," Mario whispered. He both hoped she wouldn't call because she'd be all right, and selfishly, so he could enjoy what he'd been waiting for with Ted, the build-up finally blooming into the event. Ted time finally giving way to time with Ted. Mario closed the door softly behind him, and, seeing Ted wave from his luxury sedan, the young man smiled fully, showing his bottom row of teeth, and he had to stop himself from running to the car, settling on a glide to the passenger door. Chapter 15. As Ted waved hello, his arm nearly dropping from sudden weakness, a symptom of seeing Mario, especially in a tight sleeveless black t-shirt, his skin glowing in contrast with the dark color, gold shining out from a dank cave, the older man felt bad about his decision to not follow through, to stop himself delivering on a promise he concocted and verbally signed. But it was what he had to do. And, as a result of this choice, the days since their office sex dragged on and on. Gone was the floating through life because of what he and Mario had done. The gauntlet meetup was more ashen than the Dust Bowl, the bathroom peeping prehistorical and empty. The old Ted had returned with a fast, slovenly vengeance. There were fewer vegetables in Ted's diet and more late-night drives to 24-hour donut shops. These trips were less about food and more about not being able to sleep, needing to flee his restless anxiety. And frankly, the morning stretching could go to white woman hell where it belonged. But this devolving was his own fault. How could he have ever offered to ask a client to do him a favor of medical intervention? A 5-figure ask? Not only would that put his working relationship in danger, essentially burning his yearly contract with United HealthShare, one that had been renewed for the last 8 years, but doing so would get Ted a reputation, the maudlin crybaby software engineer who begs to solve his personal problems in a business setting. After their office sex and Ted's foolish promise, the older man dropped Mario off at his house, barely able to watch that perky butt bounce up the 3 steps it took to get to the front door because of what was coming. Driving off, not even seeing if Mario made it inside. It's still light out, he'll be fine. Mario's a strong guy, Ted thought. The older man did manage to tap the horn twice, the official goodbye honk, moments before pulling over to the curb, in front of a yellow Craftsman with noisy butterfly-themed chimes, in order to dry heave into the footwell of the passenger seat, risking the cleanliness of a car he'd just gotten detailed a month prior, for fear of Mario seeing him vomit on a suburban sidewalk. Nothing substantial came out but strings of saliva that stretched before drizzling all over the fuzzy black floor mats and the brown underbelly of a small leaf that Mario must have brought into the car. He couldn't believe he had offered to ruin his own life because he had been dumb enough to tell a young, beautiful man the painful truth of his employment. For the next 5 days, Ted returned to his pre-Mario day drinking and blowing off meetings, spitting in the face of the efficient schedule he and Shayla had spent weeks crafting, the well-oiled machine struck by a sledgehammer, self-sabotaging spokes finding the perfect stick. Never had he been this bad with his lack of hygiene or sleep or work, choosing to go about his day stinking of wine with fuzzy teeth and armpits that were reminiscent of moldy cheese that even a Frenchman would blush at. But what was he supposed to do? A question he asked himself, aloud, quite loudly, on loop, over the course of 5 days. What the fuck am I gonna do? Another chug of warm white wine. What the fuck am I going to do? What the fuck am I gonna do? If Ted did choose to follow through with this promise, he'd have to finagle something out of Jeff Triad, his main contact and the particularly douche manager at United HealthShare, who only spoke in business jargon, seemingly incapable of having a human-sounding conversation. With Jeff Triad, it was all circling back regarding the monthly check-in to effectively strategize profits and pitfalls for the sake of the mission. Ted took down notes during his meetings with Jeff, because a lot of the time, he struggled to decipher what the fuck the man was actually trying to say. This man was a robot, never veering outside its own mind, unaware that it's never related once to a human being. And Jeff was the only person Ted did business with who never shared anything about his personal life. Other clients had kids, vacations, deaths, mothers-in-law, hand-wringing biopsies, and favorite snacks. Trying to connect, Ted would comment on the weather or ask about Jeff's day, but the United HealthShare businessman never responded unless it was about work, remaining silent until the exact time of the meeting, a tiny alarm for which would sound from Jeff's gold wristwatch, and he would start right in with the meeting's agenda. The only moment Jeff ever showed a flash of humanity was with the good day at the end of a meeting. Afterward, he would immediately disappear from the online call or launch out of his chair, leaving the room as if it were March 2020 and someone had coughed. How was Ted supposed to get anything out of Jeff, let alone ask him for a favor with big, wet eyes? Too day-wasted to even think about touching his computer during his 5-day bender, wanting to avoid the, "I hope you're feeling better. When should we reschedule?" emails, and the automatic alert sent to colleagues and his assistant should he make his computer active. Ted broke out the classic paper and pen and started making pro-con lists to alleviate some of his jitteriness, to feel like he was solving something. Do I help Mario and his mom? Should I help Mario and his mom? Can anyone help Mario and his mom? Ted felt guilty debating a woman's chances of staying alive, like he was complicit in the racket put forth by the companies he worked with. But, ink on paper, he was only doing what he designed programs to do, assessing a person's health and making the best treatment decision based on how much it would cost to save them. Was Mario's mother, a woman he'd never met, more important than the career he'd spent decades building? Ted was no millionaire, but he had a decent-sized savings account, plus, with the work forthcoming, a steady future. At a sizable six-figure salary, Ted would live comfortably, but he would almost certainly never retire, especially when there were younger, more savvy software engineers on his heels, ready to take his contracts with their crude tech camp knowledge, paired with their relentless career hunger, something Ted had less of as he approached 60. And he couldn't even think about the robots being trained to replace him. But Ted didn't want to fight for contracts. He didn't want to lose his working relationship with United HealthShare. So, he couldn't save Mario's mom. But he didn't want to have to say goodbye just because he couldn't do an impossible thing that he swore he could or would try to do. Ted dropped his pen, which was low on ink anyway, exhausted from scribbling out scenario after scenario, list after list, that said so clearly what Ted already knew. Mario, he said to the floor. The young man was the reason he'd told the truth about his line of work, the reason Ted had tried to soften the blow with a promise he had little intention of keeping. How can I keep it all? Ted wondered. The older man rubbed his eyes and sighed deeply. The only way forward was to lie, offer it straight to Mario that he tried. Boy, did he try, but the powers that be didn't bite down, couldn't sign off on clearing the surgery. Of course, Ted had asked again. He practically demanded, but they just didn't budge, which, Ted thought, tipping his head, concentrating, latching on to something, wasn't really a lie at all. In what world would bothering Jeff Triad with persuasion or pleading or, God forbid, posturing do? Jeff had nothing to give, and Ted would never even get that nothing. He wasn't a big enough part of the company, wasn't something of a something, only a guy behind a computer who got nothing more than a professional handshake out of obligation. Over the course of those drunken 5 days, when Ted wasn't worrying or listing possibilities, he was also saying goodbye to Mario. Staring at his tan walls, seeing it as the young man's sun-kissed skin. He even took a pencil to the smooth surface, surely it would come off, and began to trace Mario's back from memory, the one he beheld in the bathroom stall so many weeks ago, unknowingly a prelude to what they would eventually share, exchanges of flirtation and filth, perhaps on their way to love. Ted's tracing on the wall amounted to nothing more than islands of bone, with muscled rivers running through them, squiggles that were supposed to mean the meat of a man. But the drawing didn't comfort him as he hiccuped his way through it. Instead, dropping the pencil to the floor, it was depressing to see a childish rendering of what Ted would end up losing after only 2 swings, no gift of a third. Because there was no way the young man would stick around, no matter how hard Ted lied, assuring Mario that conversations were had, and that a straining neck, his own, was stuck out farther than it was ever supposed to go, becoming a taut, vulnerable throat, finally as tight as Mario's. Ted plopped back on the couch, butt crushing his pro-con lists and 2 plastic takeout boxes, old, fried wontons breaching their prison. A nearby clock said he had about 2 hours before his date, the last time he would ever be in Mario's presence. He stared down at his bare feet, the nails long enough to show white, and thought, how gross am I? I don't deserve Mario. I never did. But deserve wasn't the issue. The promise he had made was broken at its inception. Ted would be losing the one thing in his life that got him to realize that he might be worth something, might be lovable, and might just have the opportunity to share the rest of his days with someone else. Soon there would be no more of Mario's youthful teasing, the adorably immature part of him that would say something outlandish like, I had to fight off a grizzly bear once, then wait for Ted's face of shock, only to say, just playing. But it wasn't just the quirks he would miss. It was the moments of drive Ted started seeing in him on their second meeting. This confident, bright young man who had his sights on becoming a pharmacist as quickly as possible. Mario had bragged, soon I'll be making boatloads of cash, and no tweaker's gonna steal old people's pain meds on my watch. Ted would also no longer hear about Mario's day-to-day, the ins and outs of gig work, handing off heavy plastic bags of food to exhausted business people and couples in loosely cinched robes who had so clearly just gotten done fucking. Really, Mario and Ted had only spent one afternoon getting to know one another, but the older man had enjoyed the pleasure of being able to do so, soaking up as much information, as much of the experience, as he could. But now their approaching first date would be colored in disappointment, especially when, hopping into Ted's car, Mario would surely jump to the chase, what he was always doing, so hungry, so alive. Time spent dreading the loss ahead of him, one that would scar him for the rest of his life, the kind of scar that overshadows any related good memories. Ted looked back up at the clock and saw that he only had 30 minutes to get ready and drive across town. Mario had mentioned coming back to Ted's place after the date, which wasn't likely considering what was to come, but Ted still panic cleaned, dropping all the empty wine bottles into the recycling with a clatter, shoving the takeout containers and the many pro-con lists deep down into the bottom of his desk trash can. Then, he jumped into the shower to blast off the dead layers of skin and accumulated oils. Face in front of the rocketing shower head, Ted felt heartsick and hopeless. No way for a person to be before a first date. That was Baby Don't Shoot, a gay love story featuring a Luigi Mangione type. Did you enjoy yourself? Good. Then join us next Wednesday for the next installment. Consider supporting the author at buymeacoffee.com/Sally Straight, SALLYSTRAIT. Baby Don't Shoot is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. No generative artificial intelligence was used in the writing of this work. Copyright 2026.